Good afternoon. This week, exactly a year ago, we announced our Fines and Fees initiative, an important step to eliminate our city's regressive economic policies and break our addiction to fiscal policies that relied upon placing an undue burden on those least able to afford it. We started a path of relieving Chicagoans from the cycles of debt and poverty they suffer because of those regressive policies. We've been working every day since then to ensure that our city's policies do not punish residents for struggling, helping to undo years of harm that have left Chicago's poorest Black and brown communities weighed down with debt and no access to upward mobility. Today, our city government has taken 2 more steps towards achieving that goal. I'm proud to share that on the eve of the anniversary of our Fines and Fees initiative, we passed 2 ordinances. First, the reform package for vehicle impoundment, which will protect residents from the stress of vehicle insecurity. The second, the fair notice, which will prevent our renters from falling victim to housing insecurity. These initiatives matter because everyday Chicagoans deserve to have their basic needs met, such as safe housing and the ability to have their cars so they can get to and from work. But if that isn't reason enough, let me tell you a story. A few weeks ago, my team and I were handing out food in Inglewood. We were on a street in the middle of the median, handing out food and PPE to people that went by. A gentleman pulled by in his car and he yelled, "Hey, Lightfoot." Now, when someone yells my name like that, 1 or 2 things could happen. Here's what happened. He said, "Mayor, I love you. I got my car back, I got my license back, and I got a job." That's why we do that work. This gentleman was able to turn his life around because he was able to take advantage of the reforms on fines and fees and get his car back and his driver's license so he could put his life back together. And I was glad to hear it. That's why we are dedicated to building a better, more equitable Chicago. Because when every Chicagoan succeeds, we all succeed. Starting with the reform package for our city's vehicle impoundment program, we will be ending impoundment for non-driving related offenses and instead providing a pathway for residents to pay their debt. This ordinance will also target other regressive parts of this program by reducing fines, capping storage fees, which can add up to thousands of dollars and has resulted over time with so many people just abandoning their cars because they couldn't afford to pay the accumulated fees and debt. And we add legal defenses such as innocent owner defense, which will allow folks to get their cars when they've been used without their knowledge or prove that their cars shouldn't have been impounded in the first place. Additionally, this reform package will allow us to work with Chicagoans who can't afford to get their cars back and help them set up a payment plan so that they can. No city should be able to hoard and profit from the personal property of its residents just because they can't afford to pay. And no city should be taking away its residents' ability to get back and forth to work or to school. These reforms to our impoundment program will make sure that every Chicagoan has equal access and equal opportunity to getting their cars out of the pound and stopping the seizure of cars in the first place for non-moving violations. And stop forcing them to choose between getting their car back, getting food on the table, or getting sent into a cycle of debt and economic uncertainty. I am very, very proud of this ordinance, and I'm grateful for the City Council seeing that we needed to take this step and doing just that. Another important ordinance that passed today, the fair notice. It will create a more holistic and inclusive housing policy, extending the non-renewal of leases from 30 days to 120 days, one of the longest in the entire country. And for a majority of Chicagoans who rent, especially seniors, families, and those who are struggling, 30 days simply is not enough time to find a new place that's safe and secure and affordable. Meaning that before fair notice, Chicagoans were left without the place they call home and left with a growing worry about how and where they would lay their head next. Displacing Chicagoans without a fair amount of notice is not acceptable. It's not right. It's not fair. Chairman Osterman said it exactly right. Just imagine trying to move in 30 days, find a place and move in 30 days and without a vehicle to move your belongings. These reforms are interconnected and relate to each other and demonstrate just how deep-rooted and interconnected these issues of inequality are for our city's most vulnerable communities. I also want to take this moment to thank our great clerk, Anna Valencia, and for all the not-for-profit and advocacy partners in our Fines and Fees Access Collaborative, as well as Commissioner Marissa Navarro and her team at the Department of Housing, who have all worked closely with us on these measures, and also Housing Committee Chairman Harry Osterman for also shepherding this important measure through the committee and onto the City Council floor today. Because these ordinances will not only continue to make Chicago one of the few and largest cities to comprehensively tackle fines and fees reform, but to ensure that no Chicagoan is left behind by the city they call home. And now I'm happy to take on your questions.
Mayor, thanks very much. A short time ago, President Trump unloaded on Chicago. He noted the rise in shootings and named specific victims. He's ordering a surge of hundreds of federal officers to Chicago. The president says efforts to defund the police have led to the uptick in violence. What's your understanding of how many feds are coming, when they'll get here, and what's your overall reaction to the president's comments today?
So let me just make sure that everybody is clear about what's happening and what's not happening. What we saw the president and the attorney general do in Portland is a travesty, an unconstitutional intrusion and trampling of the rights of individuals who were unlawfully detained and arrested, sometimes overnight. And rightfully, the mayor of Portland, the police chief, and the residents of Portland stood up in opposition. That's not democracy that we saw unfolding on the streets of Portland as a result of this federal action. That's what we call tyranny and dictatorship. And we are not having it in Chicago. Since the president and his team started to rattle the saber that they were going to do exactly the same thing in Chicago that they'd done in Portland, I've been very clear, not happening in Chicago. We don't need federal troops. We don't need unnamed secret federal agents roaming around the streets of Chicago, taking off our residents without cause and violating their basic constitutional rights. I'm glad to see that the president got the message. I'm glad to see that he realized what he did in Portland was a grave abuse of his presidential power. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to try it here in Chicago, and we have to remain diligent. And I'm calling on all Chicagoans that if you see something that doesn't look right, please don't hesitate to report it. Call 911, call 311. We are going to remain diligent, and if we see any steps out of line, particularly with DHS or Border Patrol, we are not going to hesitate to take the president to court and stop any unconstitutional actions. Now, let me just finish. As a former federal prosecutor, federal agents who are here in Chicago have been here for decades, FBI, DEA, and ATF. We routinely work in partnership with them. They know the city and they live here. And importantly, a difference between what the president and Attorney General Barr did in Portland. Here, our U.S. Attorney, John Lausch, who I've known for 20 plus years, is a former colleague and a friend. He will be at the helm supervising these new resources that will be coming in to our city. So they're not federal troops, they're FBI, DEA, ATF, and they will be plugged in to the existing infrastructure of those agencies and manage and supervise on existing cases and investigations and manage by U.S. Attorney John Lausch. That is a big, important difference.
You mentioned that it's going to be FBI, DEA, ATF, more than 100 federal investigators. So do you support this? Did the president respond to the letter that you sent to him? And does this come with additional money to fund the initiatives that you have here locally?
If those agents are here to actually work in partnership on support of gun violence and violent cases, plugging into existing infrastructure of federal agents, not trying to play police in our streets, then that's something different, and that may add value. But the proof is going to be in the pudding. It's too soon to be able to say if this is a value add or not. We've got to see what actually materializes. Now, I heard today for the first time the President and Attorney General Barr talking about additional federal resources. Unfortunately, this administration has tried to condition law enforcement resources in terms of grants on abandoning our role as a sanctuary city. We will never, ever, ever retreat from the fact that we are a welcoming sanctuary city, and we stand with our immigrant and refugee communities. That is who we are. That is part of our values, and we're not going to have somebody dangle money in front of us and retreat and compromise our values. So today is the first time that we've heard it. We'll see if there are any strings attached. If there are that are unacceptable to us, no thank you.
One other thing with this, because the president got very specific. He mentioned the shooting outside of the funeral home last night. He mentioned specific violent weekends that we've had recently in Chicago. He blames you. He blames local leaders. What's your response?
The president has been on a campaign now for some time against Democratic mayors across the country, whether it's me, whether it's Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta, whether it's Muriel Bowser in Washington, D.C., whether it's Jenny Durkin in Seattle. Do you see a common theme here? The president is trying to divert attention from his failed leadership on COVID-19. He has failed, he has failed, he has failed. If the president really wanted to do something to aid cities, as I wrote in a letter to him on Monday, to which he has not responded, if he really wanted to help us, there are some things that the federal government is uniquely qualified to do. Why are we engaged in such violence? Because there are too many damn guns on our streets. And why is that so? Because the Republican leadership for way too long, including this president, refuses to even have a conversation about common sense gun reform. We need universal background checks. We need to close the gun show loophole. We need federal prosecutions of straw purchasers. We need to empower the ATF to actually go after federally licensed gun dealers who are constantly selling guns to straw purchasers and gang members that end up on the streets of our city and causing harm. You didn't hear anything about that today. No. The president doesn't want to actually face the tough calls and be a real leader on things that could actually make our communities safe. Make no mistake about it. What happened here today in Washington, D.C., with those poor families was a political stunt. There has been no goodwill from this president for our cities to do what is necessary to help us address local issues. Starting back to the beginning of this pandemic, the president has refused to listen to mayors across our city. What they do there affects us. We're on the front lines. There's an ample opportunity for him to be in partnership with mayors of all stripes, every party, every geography, every size, but he doesn't care. He fundamentally doesn't care. He doesn't get it. What he cares most about is himself. What he cares most about is trying to change the subject from the failure of his leadership on an issue of a pandemic of our lifetime where people are suffering. If he cared about cities, if he cared about Chicago, there are meaningful ways that the president could actually help. Instead, it's denigrate, divide, and disparage. That's not leadership.
Mayor, by no means was last night's mass shooting the fault of Chicago police, but there were 2 marked cars and a full tactical team in the area at the time of the shooting. Are you satisfied with everything CPD did? And what does it say that the cops were there, but a mass shooting still occurred?
I think what it says, unfortunately, is the brazenness and the cowardliness of the people who shot. I think it speaks volumes about that. There is an ongoing gang conflict in the areas between District 6 and 7. The commanders are very well aware of it. They have deployments to address those issues. As the superintendent said today, we assume that every time there is a funeral related to someone who has been in the gang life, that there is a potential for violence. That is precisely why those marked police cars were there and a tactical unit was nearby. But what it says is the people who are picking up guns to shoot recklessly into crowds have lost their humanity, do not value the sanctity of life. We need to pray for them, but we need to find them and bring them to justice. That's what we need to do.
Michelle Relaford of Channel 5 is asking, was CPD warned that there would be a shooting outside the funeral home?
There was information, but as I said, it is standard protocol for CPD to make sure that they are present and visible anytime there is a funeral or other gathering and memorializing someone who's been in the life. As the superintendent said today, part of what the challenge is we see this cycle of retaliation. And we need to continue to be diligent. And we were with the marked cars that were there. But unfortunately, the brazenness of these cowards and criminals apparently knows no bounds. And we're going to have to step up efforts. We have to make sure that we are reaching out to members of the community and encouraging them to overcome their fear and make an anonymous report. We already have some promising leads because people in the community are fed up, and the people in the community understand that we all have to own responsibility. And that's what's happened. And I am greatly encouraged by the number of leads that have come in from people in the community, and I feel confident that we will bring these killers to justice.
Mayor Bill Cameron is asking, is it time to consider witness protection to include relocating people willing to testify against street gang killers to out-of-state homes for them and their families?
Listen, the protection of witnesses, protection of victims has been a priority in this county, in the city for years. That doesn't change. What we need to do is make sure that we give no shelter to the people who are the killers. And obviously, if someone steps forward, that's why I'm encouraging calling the CPD tip line, because you can do that anonymously and safely.
Kelly Bauer from Block Club sends this in. Cook County had a funeral and cemetery violence task force that worked on stemming violence related to funerals. It was disbanded around January 2019. In light of what happened last night, do you want the county to bring it back?
I'm not familiar with that. Obviously, that preceded my time in office as mayor. We have been working with funeral directors really for months now, not only to obviously address the violence, but funeral directors have been really in a rock and a hard place when it comes to making sure that there's compliance with the COVID-19 restrictions around the size of crowds. We have been reaching out. We will continue to reach out and see if we need to do more to help support these funeral directors so that people can safely grieve their loved ones and their friends.
Mayor, that agreement for the city to pay $500,000 to settle a lawsuit that would have forced the release of 5 decades of secret files detailing misconduct allegations, that wasn't voted on today. Let me combine. So what do you want to see happen? And then Craig Delamore is asking, Why shouldn't police department findings of misconduct be accessible by the public without having to file FOIAs? A judge seemed to think it was reasonable.
So let me just be clear. They're not secret files. Recall that approximately 2 weeks ago, we won a victory in the Illinois Supreme Court to maintain all those records, going back to 1967, in opposition to the FOP, which wanted them destroyed. So those records are ready and they are available. Anyone can file a simple FOIA request and get them. Let me also remind you that as a result of a previous lawsuit, we have been producing all files from 2011 to 2015. Next, as a result of our agreement in the consent decree, we have an obligation which we will meet to produce all new contemporaneous CR files. There are lots of different ways in which those materials can be available. Lots of different ways. This has nothing to do about transparency. What we decided today in listening to members of the City Council who wanted more time to decide on a peripheral issue related to CR files is give more time for that conversation. That will happen. It's happened even since the City Council meeting was adjourned, and we will continue to engage with our partners in the City Council to come to, I think, a place where we can put in even more CR files online in a searchable fashion so that people can have access to them as they wish.
Mayor, from my colleague Ben Bradley, in a series of text messages with the FOP president, you called him a clown 3 times, a fraud, a cartoon character, and a liar who will be exposed. How is this type of communication with the man who represents 13,000 of the city's police officers conducive to improving relationships and making the city's streets safer?
Let's talk about what this man stands for. In the middle of everything that's going on, in a craven political move, this man waved his hand to President Trump and invited him to bring federal troops into our city. Federal troops into our city, a la Portland. How is that responsible? How does that make sense? What he should be doing is focusing on the things that are actually important to his members. We have tried to engage him in a constructive way. He refuses to do so because he's more interested in trying to make himself a political figure rather than to be a leader. I don't take back one word that I said. I absolutely wrote those words with the understanding that he would probably make them public. My characterization of him, I think, is 100% accurate. He proves that every single day. I will not retreat when I see someone who is craven, who is not constructive, and is refusing to engage in productive dialogue.
Last 2 questions.
He defined himself as to who he is.
All right, let me move on then. This is from Kelly at Block Club. Why is the City Park District only now moving to rename Douglas Park after Frederick Douglass after years of students lobbying for the change and not getting a response?
Well, look, I can't account for what happened years before, but this is an important step. It's an important step that the Park District Board is taking, and it's a part of a larger initiative that we will be announcing soon to address our racial history and past, to take account and inventory of what exists in the city and sister agencies, to memorialize our past, but also account for what's missing. I'll reveal more in the coming days, but I do think this is an important step. Yes, of course, we need to give honor and homage to the young people who've been lobbying for this. I urged the Park District to meet this week so that this step in this process could be taken, and we salute the young people who've been working on this for a number of years. This is now headed in the right direction.
Just 2 more really quick ones here. John Garcia at Channel 7 wants to know more about Wisconsin possibly being added to the list of quarantine states as soon as next week.
It's possible.
Yeah. Benjamin Zamora, WSNS. Do you have any comment regarding CTU's demonstration today and refusal to return to in-person classes in the fall?
No, I wasn't aware of it. We hope that the CTU will take it as the opportunity to be a productive partner in these discussions, as many, many parents and individual teachers and staff have already done.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.